Hey folks, this is Kelani. Welcome back to the Antorus raid guide for normal and heroic. This time we'll be looking at the Hounds of Sargeras encounter. This encounter has two bosses, Fjag and Shatug, and they have a shared health pool. The first thing to mention is that if at any time these bosses are within 40 yards of each other, they will receive a 100% damage increase buff, so make sure they are tanked more than 40 yards apart at all times. So for most of the fight you will want your raid stacked up in the middle between the two bosses. Any ranged classes that can multi-dot should do so, and your melee will be wanting to hit Shatug. They each have an ability which will be directed at their respective tanks. Fjag will use Burning More and Shatug will use Corrupting More. These two abilities do the exact same thing, a large amount of damage to your tanks, and they apply a debuff to anyone in front of the boss. Simply make sure your tanks face the bosses away from your raid and it's nothing to worry about. Each boss also has an energy bar and will cast specific abilities when they reach 33 and 100 energy on normal, and an extra ability will be cast at 66 energy on heroic mode. When Fjag gets to 33 energy, he will cast Desolate Gaze. This targets a few random players and after a short duration will deal damage in a straight line between himself and those players. The targeted players need to move out of the stacked group to make sure no one else gets hit by their line of damage. At 66 energy, Fjag will cast Molten Touch on heroic mode only. Several random players will be stunned and dragged into the air where they will take damage over time. They will also spawn a whole bunch of fiery swirls underneath them, so your group will have to dodge those. At 100 energy, Fjag will cast ENFLAMED Corruption, which deals raid-wide damage over time and also applies Enflamed debuffs to random players. When these debuffs expire, they will explode and deal damage to anyone within 8 yards. During Enflamed Corruption, you'll want to spread out loosely as much as possible, and anybody with the Enflamed debuff needs to run away from other people to make sure only they get hit. When Shatug gets to 33 energy, he will cast Consuming Sphere, which throws a large purple sphere towards a random raid target. The spheres move pretty slowly and pulls everyone in towards it. You need to make sure you're running away from the orb's pull, because if the orb touches you, it will deal increasing damage over time, so you really need to avoid it. At 66 energy, Shatug will cast Weight of Darkness on heroic mode only. This applies a 5-second debuff which slows the target over time. When the debuff expires, it will fear the target for 20 seconds, but the duration is split between everyone who helps soak it, and if more than 2 extra people help you soak the debuff, no one gets feared at all. So you need to stack at least a few people in each of these debuffs. The easiest way to do that is to just stack with your raid. Any melee who get the debuff just stack with your melee. If you don't have enough melee, you'll have to run to the raid. If the tanks get this debuff, the Shatug tank can have melee help soak the fear, and the Fjag tank will have to have ranged move over to help soak their fear. At 100 energy, Shatug will cast Siphon Corruption. This will deal raid-wide damage over time just like Fjag's ability, except the debuffs that it will randomly apply to your raid require you to stack up instead of spread out. If you get the Siphon debuff, you need to make sure you stack with your friends. Once again, melee can stack with melee, and your range should already be stacked up nicely. None of these abilities are particularly threatening by themselves, but the two bosses' abilities work against each other and some combinations can be quite devastating. If you need to spread out and you have a Consuming Sphere, you just need to be extra careful, and you should spread out loosely while the sphere is active to give you more of a chance to get away from any other raid members before your debuffs explode. If you get an exploding debuff and a debuff which requires you to stack, you're just going to have to deal with that extra damage. The stacking abilities should always take priority, but your raid really needs to know the difference between the abilities where you need to spread out and the abilities where you need to stack up. We found it easiest to have all of our range stacked between the two bosses. If you stay stacked up for the most part and just move out to avoid the orange swirls or the orb coming, and then reset back to your stack point when it's safe, you almost never have to move for half of the boss's abilities. As long as players with the fiery abilities move out when they're supposed to, it's a fairly easy fight. So that's all you should need to take down the Hounds of Sargeras on normal and heroic difficulty. Be sure to check out all of the other bosses' raid guides to make sure you're well prepared to take on Antorus. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.